Inside the cabin I was never allowed to enter, I found photographs that shattered everything I believed about my marriage. My hands trembled as I read the letters hidden beneath the floorboards. But what I discovered next made me realize my husband's death wasn't the end of his betrayal, it was just the beginning. What I did with that information left my entire family in ruins. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far my truth has traveled. I never thought I'd be standing at the door of Maplewood Cabin at 70 years old, holding a key that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. For 45 years of marriage, my husband Vincent had one unbreakable rule. I was never, under any circumstances, to visit this place. "It's my sanctuary, Eleanor," he'd told me early in our marriage, his voice firm but gentle. "Every man needs a place to think, to be alone with his thoughts. Please respect that boundary." And I had. For 45 years, I respected it without question. Even when our son Marcus asked if we could use it for family fishing trips. Even when money was tight during the recession and I suggested we could rent it out for extra income. Even when I was curious, lonely, or hurt by his frequent disappearances to the cabin for entire weekends. Even when I lay awake at night wondering what could possibly require so much solitude. I respected Vincent's one sacred boundary until he died 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack at the age of 72, and that boundary died with him. Let me back up and tell you about Vincent and me, about our life together in Riverside Falls, Montana, about how we built what everyone thought was a perfect marriage. Because to understand the magnitude of what I found in that cabin, you need to understand what I thought I had. Vincent Ashford was everything. Inside the cabin I was never allowed to enter. I found photographs that shattered everything I believed about my marriage. My hands trembled as I read the letters hidden beneath the floorboards. But what I discovered next made me realize my husband's death wasn't the end of his betrayal, it was just the beginning. What I did with that information left my entire family in ruins. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far my truth has traveled. I never thought I'd be standing at the door of Maplewood Cabin at 70 years old, holding a key that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. For 45 years of marriage, my husband Vincent had one unbreakable rule. I was never, under any circumstances, to visit this place. "It's my sanctuary, Eleanor," he'd told me early in our marriage, his voice firm but gentle. "Every man needs a place to think, to be alone with his thoughts. Please respect that boundary." And I had. For 45 years, I respected it without question. Even when our son Marcus asked if we could use it for family fishing trips, even when money was tight during the recession and I suggested we could rent it out for extra income, even when I was curious, lonely, or hurt by his frequent disappearances to the cabin for entire weekends, even when I lay awake at night wondering what could possibly require so much solitude, I respected Vincent's one sacred boundary. Until he died 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack at the age of 72, and that boundary died with him. Let me back up and tell you about Vincent and me, about our life together in Riverside Falls, Montana, about how we built what everyone thought was a perfect marriage. Because to understand the magnitude of what I found in that cabin, you need to understand what I thought I had. Vincent Ashford was everything a woman could want when I met him in 1978. I was 25, fresh out of graduate school with a teaching degree, working at Riverside Falls Elementary School. He was 27, a newly minted lawyer joining his father's practice, Ashford and Associates. We met at a community fundraiser for the local library, and he'd approached me while I was browsing the silent auction items. "The complete works of Emily Dickinson?" he'd said, reading the item I was examining. "Are you a poetry lover?" "I teach 5th grade," I'd replied with a smile. "I'm trying to instill a love of reading in my students, even if it bankrupts me at charity auctions." He'd laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that made his gray eyes crinkle at the corners.
then allow me to contribute to the cause of childhood literacy. And he'd written a bid 3 times higher than the current one. We were married 8 months later in a small ceremony at St. Michael's Church. My parents adored him. My sister Beatrice, ever the romantic, cried through the entire ceremony. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, the dedicated teacher and the principled attorney, building a life together in our small Montana town. The first decade of our marriage was everything I dreamed it would be. Vincent worked hard building his reputation, and I poured my heart into teaching. We bought a beautiful Victorian house on Elm Street with a wraparound porch and a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses. We hosted dinner parties. We took walks around Miller's Lake on Sunday afternoons. We talked about everything: politics, books, the gossip around town, our hopes for the future. Marcus was born in 1985, and for a while, life felt complete. Vincent was an attentive father, coaching Marcus's Little League team, helping with homework, teaching him to fish. I have photographs from those years: Vincent holding baby Marcus, Vincent teaching toddler Marcus to ride a bike, Vincent at Marcus's school plays. Looking at them now, I can't reconcile those images with what I would later discover. It was in 1990, when Marcus was 5, that Vincent announced he'd bought the cabin. "It's an investment property," he explained over dinner one evening. "About 3 hours north, up in the mountains near Whispering Pines. Beautiful location. Could be worth a lot someday." "Can we visit it?" I asked, excited by the prospect of family weekends in the mountains. Vincent's expression shifted. Just slightly, but I'd noticed. "Actually, I'm planning to use it as a retreat, a place to work on difficult cases without distractions. You know how demanding the practice can be?" "Of course," I said, though I felt a small pang of disappointment. "Maybe once you get it set up, we could—" "Eleanor," his voice was gentle but firm, "I need this to be my space, just mine, a place where I can completely disconnect and focus. You understand, don't you?" And I did. Or I thought I did. Vincent's law practice was demanding. He handled complex cases, often bringing work home, staying up late reviewing documents. If he needed a quiet place to focus, who was I to deny him that? "Of course, Starling," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Every man deserves a sanctuary." He'd smiled with what looked like relief. "Thank you for understanding. You're remarkable, Eleanor, truly." That conversation set the pattern for the next 35 years. Vincent would disappear to Maplewood Cabin for weekends, sometimes even full weeks. At first it was once a month, then twice a month. By the time Marcus was in high school, Vincent was gone almost every weekend. "Work retreat," he'd say, kissing my cheek as he loaded his car with supplies. "I'll be back Sunday evening."
I filled my time with teaching, with gardening, with volunteer work at the church. I told myself this was what mature marriages looked like. 2 people secure enough to have separate interests, separate spaces. I convinced myself that the growing distance between us was natural after so many years together. But there were moments, small, unsettling moments, that I pushed aside rather than examine too closely. Like the time I needed to reach Vincent urgently because Marcus had broken his arm during a basketball game. Vincent had always said there was no phone service at the cabin, but when I finally reached him hours later, I could hear background noise that sounded distinctly like a television or radio. "Must have driven into town to get signal," he'd explained. "Sorry I missed your calls, sweetheart. How's our boy?" Or the time I'd found a receipt in Vincent's jacket pocket for an expensive restaurant in Whispering Pines, a romantic Italian place called Bella Luna. When I'd asked about it casually, Vincent had explained he'd taken an important client there for a business dinner. "I didn't know you combined cabin trips with client meetings," I'd said. "Occasionally," he'd replied smoothly, "when it makes sense logistically." These small inconsistencies would nag at me for a day or two, but then life would continue, and I'd convince myself I was being paranoid or overly suspicious. Vincent was a good husband in all the ways that mattered. He provided for us. He was kind. He remembered my birthday and our anniversary. He never raised his voice in anger. Why would I question him? As Marcus grew older, he sometimes asked about the cabin. Dad, can we go fishing up at your place sometime? You always say the lake is great. When you're older. Right now, it's pretty rustic, not set up for guests yet. But years would pass, and Marcus would grow from a curious 10-year-old to a teenager to a young man. And the answer never changed. The cabin remained off-limits, mysterious, a place that existed in our family consciousness but could never be visited. Marcus went off to college, then law school, following in his father's footsteps. He met Claudia during his first year of practice, a sharp, ambitious paralegal with auburn hair and calculating green eyes. They married quickly, and I tried to embrace my new daughter-in-law, though something about Claudia always made me slightly uneasy. She had a way of watching people, assessing them, as if constantly calculating how they might be useful to her. "Your mother seems nice," she'd said at their engagement party, her eyes on me across the room. "Very accommodating." I'd chosen to take it as a compliment, though the way she said accommodating felt like she was really saying doormat. Vincent seemed to like Claudia well enough, though he kept his distance. "She's ambitious," he'd said neutrally when I asked his opinion. "Marcus will need someone strong if he wants to succeed in law." The last decade of Vincent's life, our marriage had become something I barely recognized from those early hopeful years. We lived in the same house, shared the same bed, but we'd become strangers, performing the roles of husband and wife. Vincent spent more and more time at the cabin, sometimes 3 weeks out of 4. When he was home, he was distant, distracted, as if his real life existed somewhere else, and he was merely visiting our marriage out of obligation. I should have confronted him. I should have demanded answers, insisted on transparency, or simply driven to the cabin myself. But I was 65, 66, 67 years old, and the thought of upending my entire life, of discovering something that might shatter the foundation of everything I had built, terrified me more than living with uncertainty. "Are you happy?" my sister Beatrice had asked during one of her visits from Seattle. "Happy enough," I'd replied, which was the most honest answer I could give. "Eleanor, you deserve more than enough," she'd said, taking my hand. "You spent your whole life accommodating everyone else. Vincent, Marcus, your students. When do you get to be the priority?" "I'm 67 years old, Bea. It's too late to start demanding things." "It's never too late for the truth," she'd said firmly. I'd brushed off her concern then, but her words would echo in my mind 3 months later, standing in that cabin, staring at photographs that proved she'd been right all along. Vincent's death had been sudden and shocking. He'd been at the cabin, of course, when it happened. A massive heart attack, the coroner said. He'd died instantly. Probably never even knew what hit him. A neighbor who lived half a mile down the mountain road had found him 2 days later when he'd gone to borrow some tools and noticed Vincent's car still in the driveway. The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday in March. St. Michael's Church was packed with people whose lives Vincent had touched, clients he had represented, colleagues from the Bar Association, friends from our 40 decades in Riverside Falls. They spoke of his integrity, his dedication to justice, his love for his family. Vincent was a man of principle, Judge Harrison said in his eulogy, a man who believed in doing right even when it was difficult. I sat in the front pew beside Marcus and Claudia, accepting condolences, playing the role of the devoted widow with grace that came from decades of playing roles I'd perfected, the supportive wife, the understanding partner, the woman who asked no questions. But grief does strange things to a person's mind. In the weeks following Vincent's death, I found myself unable to sleep, wandering through our house at odd hours, touching his belongings as if they might somehow explain the man I'd spent 45 years with, but never really knew. It was during one of these restless nights, about 6 weeks after the funeral, that I found myself in Vincent's study. He'd kept this room locked during his lifetime, his private sanctuary within our home. But now, with him gone,
I had the right to enter, to explore, to finally understand the man who'd shared my life. The study was exactly as he'd left it. Law books lined the walls, his mahogany desk sat in front of the window overlooking our garden, files and papers were stacked with his characteristic neatness. Everything was organized, controlled, just like Vincent himself. I began going through his desk drawers, telling myself I was looking for important documents, insurance policies, account information, legal papers that needed to be filed. But really, I was searching for something else. Some clue to who Vincent Ashford really was beneath the careful facade he'd maintained. Most of what I found was mundane. Old case files, correspondence with clients, financial records. But then, in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of legal journals, I found a small wooden box with a lock. My hands trembled as I searched for a key. It took another hour of searching before I found it, taped to the underside of his desk drawer as if he'd known that someday someone might look, but wanted to make them work for it. Inside the box were 3 things: a stack of letters bound with a blue ribbon, a small velvet jewelry box, and a brass key on a ring labeled MC, Maplewood Cabin. The letters were addressed to V, in handwriting I didn't recognize, distinctly feminine with flowing loops and curves. I opened the first one with shaking hands. "My darling V," it began. "These weekends with you are the only time I feel truly alive. I count the days until you return to our sanctuary." Our sanctuary. The words hit me like a physical blow. Vincent hadn't been going to the cabin for solitude or work. He'd been going there to be with someone else. I read letter after letter, my horror growing with each one. They spanned years, decades actually. The earliest was dated 1991, just a year after Vincent had bought the cabin. The most recent was from 6 months before his death. They spoke of love, of a life built in secret, of weekends that felt like stolen treasures. They referenced inside jokes, shared memories, plans for a future that apparently didn't include me. But it was the jewelry box that truly broke me. Inside was a woman's ring, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. On the inside of the band, an engraving: V and L, always. L. She had a name, this woman who'd shared my husband's life, this woman who'd gotten the parts of Vincent I'd been denied, his presence, his attention, his real self. The brass key felt hot in my palm as I held it. For 35 years, this key had unlocked a door to a life I knew nothing about. A life Vincent had protected, hidden, prioritized over the one he had with me. I sat in his chair until dawn broke, the letters scattered across his desk, and made a decision. I would go to the cabin. I would see this place that had meant more to my husband than his own home. I would finally, after all these years, cross the threshold Vincent had forbidden me to enter. But first, I needed to handle the situation with Marcus. My son had called the next morning, as he did most days since his father's death, checking on me with dutiful concern. "How are you doing, Mom? Do you need anything?" "Actually, Marcus, I've been thinking about the cabin. I found the key among your father's things. I'm planning to drive up there this weekend, see what needs to be done with the property." The silence in the other end of the line lasted several seconds too long. "The cabin," Marcus finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "Mom, I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not? It's my property now, isn't it? Part of Vincent's estate?" "Of course, but look, that place probably needs a lot of work. It's been empty for 3 months. Let me go up there first, assess the situation. You shouldn't have to deal with that." The urgency in his voice made my skin prickle. "Marcus, is there something about the cabin you're not telling me?"
No, of course not. But he'd answered too quickly, too defensively. I just think it might be difficult for you emotionally. Dad loved that place. Being there without him might be overwhelming. I appreciate your concern, but I'm 70 years old, not an invalid. I can handle a trip to the mountains. Mom, please, just wait a few days. I'm going on Saturday, Marcus. If you want to join me, you're welcome to. But I'm going. Another long silence. I can't this weekend. Claudia and I have plans. But Mom, really, maybe you should wait until... Goodbye, Marcus. I'll call you when I get back. I hung up before he could protest further. His reaction had been strange, almost panicked. It confirmed what those letters had made me suspect. The cabin held secrets that extended beyond just Vincent. Friday evening, I called my sister Beatrice. I'm doing it tomorrow. I'm going to the cabin. The forbidden cabin? Beatrice had never hidden her opinion that Vincent's secretiveness was unhealthy. Good, it's time you knew the truth, whatever it is. I'm terrified, Bea. Of course you are. But Eleanor, you've been terrified for years. Terrified of rocking the boat, of asking hard questions, of demanding the truth. This is your chance to stop being afraid. What if what I find destroys everything I thought my life was? Then you'll rebuild, she said firmly. You're stronger than you know. And whatever you find, you'll finally know the truth. Isn't that better than wondering forever? Saturday morning dawned cold and gray. I packed a small bag. I didn't plan to stay at the cabin, just wanted to see it, to understand what had been hidden from me all these years. The drive north took 3.5 hours through increasingly remote mountain roads.
Maplewood Cabin was located in the wilderness near Whispering Pines, accessible only by a winding dirt road that climbed steadily into the mountains. I'd looked at it once on a map years ago, but Vincent had been furious when he'd discovered me researching the location. "Can't I have anything that's just mine?" he'd snapped, one of the few times I'd ever heard him raise his voice. I'd apologized, backed down, respected his boundaries like always. As I navigated the final turns of the mountain road, I felt my breath catching in my throat. And then suddenly, there it was. Maplewood Cabin, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines with a view of a crystalline lake beyond. It was beautiful. Not the rustic hunting shack I'd imagined, but a substantial 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, large windows, and what looked like recent renovations. This wasn't a retreat for an occasional weekend. This was a home. I parked beside the porch, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the place that had been forbidden to me for 35 years. How much money had gone into building and maintaining this place? How much of our income, our savings, had funded this secret life? The brass key slid easily into the lock. Too easily. The mechanism was well maintained, frequently used. The doors swung open with barely a sound, and I stepped across the threshold for the first time. The interior took my breath away. Hardwood floors gleamed in the morning light. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, leather furniture, and built-in bookshelves filled with volumes I recognized. Vincent's favorite authors, many of them books I'd given him as gifts over the years. But it was the photographs covering every surface that made my knees buckle. Vincent, younger, his arm around a stunning blonde woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The two of them hiking together, laughing at something off camera. Dancing at what looked like a wedding, but not our wedding. Cooking together, in this very kitchen. Hundreds of photographs spanning decades documenting a life I knew nothing about. And then I saw it. The photograph that changed everything. Vincent, the blonde woman, and a child. A boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the porch outside. The boy had Vincent's gray eyes, his smile, his distinctive widow peak. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. A son. Vincent had another son. I sank onto the leather sofa, the photograph clutched in my trembling hands. All these years, All these weekends at the cabin, Vincent had been living a second life. With another woman, with another child, a whole family I knew nothing about. How was this possible? How had he maintained this deception for decades? And why? Why marry me at all if he wanted to be with someone else? The question swirled through my mind as I sat there staring at proof of my husband's ultimate betrayal. But this was only the beginning. As I would discover in the hours to come, Vincent's secret went far deeper than a hidden family. And the truth would connect to people I trusted, people in my own family, in ways that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. I stood up on shaking legs and began searching the cabin systematically. The kitchen drawers, the bedroom closets, the bathroom cabinets. I was looking for answers, for some explanation that could make sense of this impossible situation. In the master bedroom, I found women's clothing in the closet. Expensive dresses, casual wear, all in sizes that suggested the blonde woman from the photographs still visited regularly, or had visited, until Vincent's death 3 months ago. On the nightstand was a framed photograph of Vincent and the woman on what looked like a beach somewhere, tropical. They looked happy, more than happy. They looked like people in love, comfortable with each other, free. I'd never seen Vincent look that relaxed with me, not even in our earliest days. The realization hit me with devastating clarity. This was his real life, his true family. I had been the secret, the obligation, the life he maintained out of duty or convenience. This cabin, this woman, this child, they were what Vincent had actually wanted. I was the mistake he never quite figured out how to escape. I set the photograph back on the nightstand and moved to the dresser, opening drawers with methodical precision. Inside were more women's clothes. Silk nightgowns, cashmere sweaters, expensive lingerie still in department store boxes. In the back of one drawer, I found a small jewelry box containing earrings, bracelets, necklaces. Each piece looked carefully chosen, thoughtfully given. Vincent had never been particularly good at buying me jewelry. For our 20th anniversary, he'd given me a practical watch. For our 30th, a strand of modest pearls. I'd told myself that gift-giving wasn't his love language, that the practical nature of his presence reflected his practical nature. But here was evidence that Vincent knew exactly how to choose beautiful romantic gifts. He just hadn't chosen to give them to me. I moved to the bathroom, needing to splash more cold water on my face, to ground myself in physical sensation before the emotional weight crushed me completely. The bathroom was as beautifully appointed as the rest of the cabin. Marble countertops, a deep soaking tub, expensive toiletries lined up neatly by the sink. And there, on the counter, I found something that made my heart stop. A toothbrush. Not just any toothbrush, but a pink one, clearly meant for a woman. It sat in a holder next to a blue one, Vincent's presumably. 2 toothbrushes, side by side, the domestic intimacy of the image more painful than any of the photographs. This woman brushed her teeth next to my husband. She woke up beside him in that bed I'd seen through the doorway. She cooked breakfast in that kitchen, read books from those shelves, and sat by that fireplace on cold mountain evenings.
She had lived the life I thought was mine. I gripped the edge of the marble counter, my reflection in the mirror showing a woman I barely recognized. My face was pale, my eyes red-rimmed, my carefully maintained composure completely shattered. At 70 years old, I looked every day of my age and then some. How long had Vincent been living this double life? The letters I'd found in his study dated back to 1991, 34 years. 34 years of lies, of weekends stolen from our marriage, of love given to someone else while I waited at home like a faithful dog, content with whatever scraps of attention he threw my way. The thought made me physically ill. I rushed to the bathroom and knelt beside the toilet, retching though there was nothing in my stomach to come up. When the spasms finally stopped, I sat back against the wall, tears streaming down my face.
45 years. I'd given this man 45 years of my life. I'd been faithful, supportive, understanding. I'd asked no questions, respected his boundaries, made myself small and accommodating so he could have his sanctuary. And the entire time, he'd been living another life, loving another woman, raising another child. What did that make our life together? What did that make me? I thought about all the times I'd defended Vincent to well-meaning friends who'd suggested his absences were strange. He works so hard, I'd say. He deserves his own space. I'd been his unwitting accomplice, helping him maintain the fiction of our marriage while he built a real life elsewhere. The worst part was remembering the times I'd felt guilty for wanting more, for wishing he'd spend weekends with me instead of disappearing to the cabin, for feeling lonely in my own marriage. I told myself I was being selfish, demanding, unreasonable, that I should be grateful for what I had rather than yearning for more. But there had been more. Vincent had been capable of presence, of attention, of romantic gestures and thoughtful gifts. He just hadn't given those things to me. He'd given them to her. Whoever she was. But as I sat there on that bathroom floor, something began to shift inside me. The devastation started transforming into something harder, colder, anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the deep, determined fury of someone who'd been used and dismissed for far too long. Vincent was dead. He couldn't answer for what he'd done, but someone knew about this. Someone had to know. And then it hit me. Marcus's reaction on the phone, the way he'd tried to prevent me from coming here, the panic in his voice. My son knew. Marcus had known about his father's secret family. The betrayal deepened, spreading like poison through my veins. My own son had kept this from me, had let me live in ignorance while knowing the truth about his father's double life. How many family dinners had we shared where Marcus sat across from me, knowing what I didn't? How many times had I talked about Vincent, about our marriage, about feeling lonely, while Marcus remained silent, protecting his father's lies? I remembered a conversation from 2 years ago when Marcus had stopped by for coffee. I'd been feeling particularly low that day, missing Vincent, who'd been at the cabin for nearly 3 weeks straight. "Do you think your father still loves me?" I'd asked Marcus, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Marcus had looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. "Of course he does, Mom. He's just... Dad works a lot. You know how he is." "I used to know how he was," I'd said quietly. "Now I'm not so sure." Marcus had changed the subject quickly, asking about my garden, about the upcoming church fundraiser, anything to avoid continuing that conversation. At the time, I thought he was simply uncomfortable discussing his parents' marriage. Now I understood he was protecting a secret. My own son had looked me in the eye and lied to me. How deep did this conspiracy go? Who else knew? Claudia? Had my daughter-in-law been in on it too? Is that why she always seemed to look at me with that calculating expression, as if assessing how much I knew, how much she needed to hide? I pulled myself up from the bathroom floor and splashed cold water on my face. The reflection in the mirror looked older than it had that morning. Older and somehow different. The woman staring back at me lost something, but gained something too. I was done being accommodating, done being the woman who asked no questions, done being the convenient wife who stayed in her lane while her husband lived his real life elsewhere. It was time to find out the full truth. And if Marcus knew about this, then others might know too. The secret had been kept by multiple people, all of them content to let me live in a lie. I left the bathroom and continued my search of the cabin with renewed determination. There had to be more. Letters, documents, something that would tell me who the woman was, who the child was, and how many people had conspired to keep me in the dark. The living room yielded more photographs, more evidence of a life fully lived. I found a calendar on the kitchen wall, marked with notations in Vincent's handwriting. Elle's birthday, reservations at Bella Luna. Tommy's graduation, don't forget camera. Anniversary weekend, surprise her with trip to the coast. Tommy! The boy had a name. And Vincent had been present for his graduation, had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, had planned surprises and romantic getaways. All the things he'd stopped doing with me years ago. I pulled the calendar off the wall and tucked it under my arm, evidence for the pile I was building. Then I opened the kitchen drawers, rifling through utensils and dish towels, looking for anything that might provide more answers.
In a drawer near the stove, I found a stack of mail. Bills mostly, addressed to Vincent Ashford at this address. Electric bills, property tax statements, credit card invoices. The amounts made me gasp. Thousands of dollars in monthly charges. Designer clothing stores, expensive restaurants, jewelry shops, luxury hotels. Vincent had been funding an entire second household, maintaining an expensive lifestyle that must have cost as much as our own home in Riverside Falls. Where had all this money come from? Had he been skimming from the law practice, hiding assets from me? Our financial situation had always seemed comfortable but not lavish. We'd lived well but modestly. Or so I'd thought. Now I realized that modest lifestyle had been necessary to hide the fortune he'd been spending elsewhere. That's when I noticed the loose floorboard in the corner of the bedroom. My heart pounding, I knelt down and pried it up with my fingers. The wood came away easily, as if it had been lifted many times before. Underneath was a metal box similar to the one I'd found in Vincent's study, but larger. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled together with rubber bands, legal documents with official seals, photographs I hadn't seen displayed in the main rooms, more intimate ones, more recent ones. And at the very bottom, beneath everything else, a leather-bound journal in Vincent's distinctive handwriting. I lifted out the journal first, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The wood was worn smooth from handling, the pages filled with Vincent's neat script. I opened to a random page in the middle and began to read. March 15th, 2018. Told Eleanor I needed to work on the Henderson case this weekend. The lie came easily, as they always do now. I've become so practiced at deception that I barely register the guilt anymore. Is that growth or simply moral decay? I used to feel terrible every time I lied to her. Now it's just Tuesday. Laura asked me again when I was going to tell Eleanor the truth, when I was going to finally leave and make our relationship official. I gave her the same answer I always give. Soon, when the time is right, when Marcus is more settled. But the truth is, I don't know if I'll ever leave. Eleanor has done nothing wrong. She's been a faithful wife, a devoted mother. She doesn't deserve to be abandoned in her old age. But I also can't imagine giving up this life with Laura and Tommy. They're my happiness, my peace, my real family. So I continue living this double life, giving pieces of myself to two different worlds, and feeling like I'm cheating them both. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. Vincent had known exactly what he was doing. He'd felt guilty about it, at least initially, but not guilty enough to stop, not guilty enough to be honest. He'd chosen comfort over integrity, decided that his happiness was worth my pain, worth living a lie. And this Laura? She'd known about me? She'd been asking him to leave me to make the relationship legitimate. How long had they been having that conversation? How many times had she pressured him while I remained oblivious at home, thinking my marriage was simply going through a quiet, companionable phase? I flipped through more pages, my horror growing with each entry. Vincent had documented everything. His first meeting with Laura at a legal conference in 1990, their initial affair, the moment she told him she was pregnant, his decision to buy this cabin as a place where they could build a life together. He'd written about Tommy's birth, his first steps, his first day at school. All the milestones I'd experienced with Marcus, Vincent had experienced again with another child. But it was an entry from just 6 months ago that made everything click into place. November 3rd, 2024. Marcus came to the cabin today. He brought Claudia with him, which surprised me. I've kept her out of this part of my life until now. But Marcus insisted she needed to know that they were working on something together that required full knowledge of the family situation. I don't like Claudia. There's something calculating about her, something cold beneath the charm. But Marcus seems determined to include her in everything, including this. They spent hours asking questions about Laura, about Tommy, about the financial arrangements I've made. Marcus wanted to know about my will, about what provisions I'd made for both families. I told him I'd taken care of everything, that both families would be provided for, but I could see Claudia's mind working, calculating assets, evaluating worth. She looked at the cabin the way she looks at everything, assessing its value, its usefulness to her. Marcus assured me they just wanted to make sure everyone was protected, but something about the visit left me uneasy. There was an urgency to their questions that felt less like concern and more like planning. The sun was setting over the lake by the time I finished reading the journal, and the woman who sat there in the growing darkness was not the same woman who'd crossed that threshold earlier that day. Eleanor Ashford, the accommodating wife, the understanding mother, the woman who'd spent 70 years making herself small for other people's comfort, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who knew the truth, someone who understood that her son and daughter-in-law hadn't just known about Vincent's secret life, they'd been planning something involving it, something that Vincent himself had found unsettling.
And what I planned to do next would destroy my family. But after what they'd done to me, after how they'd used me, maybe they deserved to be destroyed. I gathered up the evidence, the journal, the letters, the documents, the photographs, the calendar, the bills, and placed them carefully in my bag. Then I took one last look around the cabin that had been forbidden to me for 35 years. This beautiful lie, this secret life. This proof that everything I'd believed about my marriage, my family, my entire adult existence had been a carefully constructed deception. But now I knew something Vincent hadn't counted on me learning. Something that involved Marcus and Claudia in ways that suggested their motives weren't purely innocent. Whatever they'd been planning during that visit 6 months ago, whatever they'd been so urgently asking about, it had made Vincent uneasy. And 3 months later, Vincent had died of a sudden heart attack, alone at the cabin, found 2 days after the fact. For the first time, a new question entered my mind. Had Vincent's death really been natural, or had someone helped it along? I walked out of that cabin a different woman than the one who'd entered it, and I was ready for war. The drive back from Maplewood Cabin took 4 hours instead of 3. I had to pull over twice, once because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't control the steering wheel, and once because I broke down sobbing so hard I couldn't see the road through my tears. By the time I reached Riverside Falls, it was nearly midnight. The Victorian house on Elm Street that Vincent and I had shared for 40 years looked different to me now. Not like a home, but like a museum of lies. Every room held memories that I now had to re-examine through the lens of betrayal. I couldn't go inside. Not yet. Not to sleep in the bed I'd shared with a man who'd been lying to me for 34 years. Instead, I drove to my sister Beatrice's house on the other side of town. Beatrice answered the door in her bathrobe, her face shifting from surprise to concern the moment she saw my expression. "Eleanor, what's wrong? It's after midnight." I went to the cabin, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Bea, I found everything." She pulled me inside, settled me on her couch, and made tea while I sat there trembling. When she returned, she took my hand. "Tell me." I told her about the photographs of Vincent with Laura and their son Tommy, the letters spanning decades, the expensive bills, the women's clothing in the closet, about Vincent's journal documenting his double life with casual detail, and then I told her about the entry mentioning Marcus and Claudia's visit 6 months ago, their urgent questions about Vincent's finances and will that had made Vincent uncomfortable. Beatrice listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each revelation. When she finished, she set down her tea with force. "That son of a bitch," she said quietly. 45 years, Eleanor. He stole 45 years from you. He's dead, Bea. He can't answer for what he did. But Marcus can. Her eyes flashed with anger. Your son knew and let you live in ignorance. He protected his father's lies. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "What are you going to do?" Beatrice asked.
I need to confront Marcus. But first, I need to sleep. I spent the night in Beatrice's guest room, but sleep never came. I lay in the dark, replaying 45 years of marriage, re-examining every moment through the lens of betrayal. By dawn, I had made my decision. At 7 in the morning, I called Marcus's cell phone. "Mom, is everything okay? It's pretty early." "I need to see you today, Marcus. It's important." There was a pause. "Is this about the cabin? Did you go up there?" My heart rate spiked. He knew. "Yes, I went to the cabin, and yes, we need to talk. Can you come to Aunt Beatrice's house at 9? Come alone. I don't want Claudia there." "Mom, if this is about 9 o'clock, Marcus, don't be late." I hung up before he could respond. Beatrice made breakfast, but I could barely eat. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus's silver Lexus pulled up. I watched from the window as he straightened his tie and walked to the door, looking nervous. Good. He should be. I opened the door before he could knock. "Come in." Marcus stepped inside, his eyes scanning my face with concern. "Mom, you look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "No. How could I sleep after what I found at your father's cabin?" He flinched. "Mom, I can explain." "Can you?" I picked up the bag containing the evidence. "Can you explain why you never told me that your father had another family, another son, that he'd been living a double life for 34 years? Marcus's face went pale. "You found the photographs." "I found everything, Marcus. The photographs, the letters, the documents, the photographs, the calendar, the bills, the women's clothing in the closet. And you knew about it." "Mom, please. How long," I demanded, "how long have you known?" Marcus sank onto Beatrice's couch, his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "Since I was 16. The number hit me like a physical blow. 26 years, I said aloud. 26 years, and you never told me." "I wanted to," Marcus said desperately. "God, Mom, you have no idea how many times I almost told you. But Dad made me promise. He said it would destroy you." "Protecting me?" I laughed bitterly. "He was protecting himself, Marcus, and you helped. I was 16 when I found out. I was just a kid. I didn't know what to do." "How did you find out?"
Marcus took a deep breath. I followed him. Dad had been acting strange, secretive. So one weekend, when he said he was going to the cabin, I borrowed a friend's car and followed him. He paused. I saw him with them, Laura and Tommy, having a picnic by the lake, looking like a perfect family. I realized that kid looked like me, like Dad. "What did you do?" I confronted him that night. We had a huge fight. He tried to deny it, then justify it. He said he'd fallen in love with Laura before he realized he was unhappy with you, but by then you were already married and I was on the way. He said he couldn't give up Laura, so he made arrangements to have both families. "Made arrangements," I repeated flatly, like we were business deals. "He made me promise not to tell you, said it would destroy our family if you knew, that you'd divorce him, I'd lose my father, everything would fall apart." And I believed him. I was 16 and I believed him. "You're 42 now, Marcus. You've had 26 years to tell me the truth." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "Every year that passed made it harder. How do you tell your mother her entire marriage is a lie after keeping that secret for decades?" I stared at my son and saw a stranger. "Tell me about the visit 6 months ago. You and Claudia went to the cabin. Vincent wrote that you asked about his finances and will. What were you planning?" Marcus's expression became guarded. "What makes you think we were planning anything?" "Because your father wrote that your visit made him uncomfortable, that there was urgency to your questions. So I'll ask again, what were you and Claudia planning?" "We weren't planning anything," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We just wanted to make sure everyone was taken care of if something happened to Dad." "Both families," I said coldly. "You mean Laura and Tommy. Did you ever think about protecting me?" "Of course! That's why I tried to stop you from going to the cabin." "So your solution was to let me remain ignorant? To let me mourn a man who never really existed?" "I was trying to spare you pain." You were trying to spare yourself guilt, I shot back. You didn't want to deal with the fallout of the truth. The silence was heavy. Marcus sat with his head in his hands, looking like a guilty child. What happens now? He finally asked. Now, you're going to tell me everything. Who is Laura? Where is she? Does she know Vincent is dead? Laura knows, he said quietly. I called her the day after Dad died. She and Tommy came to the funeral, but they stayed in the back. You wouldn't have noticed them. The revelation staggered me. They were at the funeral? They watched me bury him? Laura wanted to pay her respects. She loved Dad too, Mom. Don't try to make me sympathize with her. She knew he was married. She chose to be with a married man. She's not a monster. She's just a woman who fell in love. With my husband, I snapped. Where is she now? She lives in Whispering Pines. She's a librarian there. And Tommy? He's 26, just finished medical school, doing his residency in Seattle. 26. A whole person I'd never known existed. Does he know about me? Yes, Dad told him when he was 18. I looked at Marcus and felt something inside me harden. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I wasted. Sorry doesn't explain why you thought protecting your father's secret was more important than my right to know the truth. What do you want me to say? Marcus's voice cracked. I made a terrible choice at 16, then compounded it every day for 26 years. I can't undo it. All I can do is say I'm sorry and hope that someday you'll forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive you, Marcus, but what I can do is try to understand why you and Claudia were so interested in Vincent's finances 6 months ago. I told you, don't lie to me again. Your father's journal said your questions made him uncomfortable. Why? Marcus was quiet. Then, Claudia thought we should contest the will if Dad left everything to Laura and Tommy. My blood ran cold. Contest the will? She said it wasn't fair, that you and I were the legitimate family. She wanted to know how much Dad was worth, whether there was a way to challenge whatever provisions he had made for them. Your interests, I said, not mine. You never told me the truth and let me decide how to handle my own life. You just kept making decisions for me, keeping secrets from me. That's not fair, Mom. Fair? I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's not fair. Spending 45 years being faithful to a man living a double life, raising a son who repays your love by lying for 26 years, discovering at 70 that your entire adult life has been built on deception. Tears streamed down Marcus's face. I know I failed you, but Mom, please don't shut me out. You're all I have left. You have Claudia, and apparently a half-brother and stepmother. You have plenty of family. What you don't have is a mother who trusts you. Mom!
I need you to leave now. I walked to the door and opened it. I need time to process this. Time to figure out what I'm going to do. Marcus stood slowly, pale. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But Marcus, whatever I decide, you're going to live with the consequences. He walked to the door, pausing in front of me. I love you, Mom. Love without honesty isn't love, Marcus. It's manipulation. I closed the door in his face and stood there, listening to his car start and drive away. Then I went back to Beatrice's living room and collapsed onto the couch. Beatrice emerged from her bedroom. She sat beside me, pulling me into her arms. He knew, I sobbed. For 26 years, he knew. I heard, Beatrice said quietly. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. And Claudia, she was planning to contest Vincent's will even before he died. Someone who cares more about money than people. I pulled back. B. Vincent died 3 months ago. A sudden heart attack, alone at the cabin. And 6 months before that, Marcus and Claudia were there asking urgent questions about his finances. Questions that made Vincent uncomfortable. Beatrice's eyes widened. Eleanor, what are you saying? I'm saying the timing is suspicious. Marcus and Claudia knew about the double life, knew about the financial strain, were concerned about the inheritance. Then suddenly, Vincent dies at 72, which isn't that old for someone otherwise healthy. You think they had something to do with his death? I don't know, but I need to find out. I need to know if my husband died of natural causes or if someone helped him along. Beatrice was quiet. That's a serious accusation. If you're wrong, if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But if I'm right, then my son and his wife are murderers. What do you need? I need to find out more about Vincent's death. The coroner's report, the circumstances, whether there was an autopsy. I know someone at the county medical examiner's office. Let me make some calls. While Beatrice worked her contacts, I thought about everything Marcus had revealed. 26 years of lies, a secret half-brother, a mistress who'd attended the funeral, and a daughter-in-law whose greed might have extended to murder. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything. Please don't do anything rash. We can work through this as a family. I love you." I stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Beatrice returned with a folder of documents. "My friend came through. This is everything they have on Vincent's death." I opened it with trembling hands. The coroner's report, death certificate, and officer's notes. Cause of death, acute myocardial infarction, massive heart attack, no signs of foul play. No toxicology report ordered because the death appeared natural. So it was natural. No toxicology report, I interrupted. They didn't test for anything, but there are substances that can trigger a heart attack and don't show up in a standard autopsy. I kept reading. Vincent was found by a neighbor 2 days after death. Estimated time of death was Friday evening. Marcus and Claudia said they had plans that weekend. That doesn't prove anything. Look at this, I pointed to the officer's notes. Empty coffee mug on the table beside the deceased. Contents had been washed away by condensation from open window. Condensation washed away evidence, or someone washed the mug before opening the window. We looked at each other, the implications heavy between us. If you really think they murdered Vincent, you need to go to the police. With what evidence? A journal entry? Suspicious timing? A washed mug? They'll say I'm a grief-stricken widow. Then what will you do? I'm going to find the proof. I'm going to dig into their finances, their movements that weekend, their motives. I'm going to find the truth. And when you do, then I'm going to make sure they face justice, even if it means destroying my own son. Beatrice studied my face. You're not the same woman who walked through my door last night. No, that woman believed in the goodness of people, in the sanctity of family. That woman died in that cabin. And who are you now? Someone who wants the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter who it destroys. That afternoon, I drove back to my house and started going through Vincent's files. I found his will in a locked drawer. It had been updated 6 months ago, right after Marcus and Claudia's visit. The new version left half his estate to me and half to Laura and Tommy. His law practice would go to Marcus, but the cabin would go to Tommy. Bank accounts were split evenly between his two families. But there was a clause. In the event that my wife Eleanor predeceases me, her portion shall be divided equally between my son Marcus Ashford and my son Thomas Whitfield. I sat back in Vincent's chair, feeling cold certainty settle over me. Marcus and Claudia knew about the updated will. They'd been planning to contest it. But what if they decided contesting would be too messy? What if they decided on a simpler solution? If Vincent died before making his double life public, Marcus could claim to be the sole heir. Except Vincent had already updated the will. So what if the plan had changed? What if instead of killing Vincent before he updated the will, they decided to kill me? I was the obstacle. I was the one standing between Marcus and his inheritance. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Claudia. She'd never called me directly before. I answered. "Hello, Claudia." "Eleanor, Marcus told me about your conversation. I wanted to reach out." "That's thoughtful." "We don't keep secrets from each other," Claudia said, and I had to suppress bitter laughter. "He's very upset. We both want to help you through this." "How considerate." "Eleanor, you've had a terrible shock. Vincent's deception was cruel, and Marcus should have told you years ago. But dwelling on the past won't change anything. What matters is moving forward." Moving forward toward what? Toward healing. Toward rebuilding your relationship with Marcus. Toward handling Vincent's estate properly. You mean protecting Marcus's inheritance? There was a pause. I mean, making sure you're taken care of. You're Vincent's widow. You deserve to be prioritized.
Prioritized over Laura and Tommy. Over the woman who helped your husband betray you for 34 years, Claudia said, her voice hardening. Why should she benefit from her affair? Because Vincent wanted it that way. A will that can be contested. Eleanor, if you and Marcus present a united front, no judge would side with the mistress. What exactly are you proposing? Challenge the provisions for Laura and Thomas. You'd keep your half, Marcus would inherit Vincent's practice and the other half, and Laura would get a modest settlement to go away. And if she doesn't go quietly, then we make it public. Expose the affair, paint her as a homewrecker. We make her fight for every penny while the whole town watches. Trust me, she'll take the settlement. I felt sick. I need to think about it. Of course, but Eleanor, don't do anything that might complicate the estate. Don't contact Laura. Don't make public statements. Let Marcus and me handle everything. I'm sure you do, I said quietly. Thank you for calling, Claudia. I hung up, hands shaking. Claudia had just revealed herself completely. A cold, calculating woman who saw Vincent's death as an opportunity. And Marcus had married her, had stood by while she planned to steal an inheritance. I needed to talk to Laura. I needed to understand Vincent's state of mind in his last months. I searched for the Whispering Pines Public Library and found a number. My finger hovered over the call button. What would I say to Vincent's other woman? But I needed answers Marcus couldn't give me. I pressed call. Whispering Pines Public Library, this is Laura speaking. Her voice was warm, pleasant. It made me hate her a little more. Laura Whitfield? A pause. Yes. Who's calling? This is Eleanor Ashford, Vincent's wife. The silence was absolute. Eleanor, she finally said, I don't know what to say. You could start by telling me if you're free to talk, privately. I'm at work until 5. Then meet me after work. Mountain Brew on Main Street, 6 o'clock. Don't bring Tommy. Eleanor, I'm not sure. 6 o'clock. If you don't show up, I'll come to your house. We're having this conversation one way or another. I hung up before she could refuse. I'd just done something the old Eleanor would never do, but the old Eleanor was dead. The woman I was now wanted truth more than peace, and tomorrow I would begin finding it. I arrived at Mountain Brew 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots. The coffee shop was quiet on a Tuesday evening, just a few students hunched over laptops and an elderly couple sharing a slice of cake. I chose a corner booth where we could talk privately and ordered tea I knew I wouldn't drink. At exactly 6 o'clock, the door chimed, and a woman walked in. I recognized her immediately from the photographs. The blonde hair now touched with gray, the kind eyes that had smiled at Vincent in hundreds of pictures. She wore jeans and a cardigan, looking like any other middle-aged librarian finishing her workday. She saw me and froze for a moment. Then she squared her shoulders and walked to my table. Eleanor. Laura, please, sit down. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Up close, I could see the lines around her eyes, the evidence of sleepless nights. She looked like what she was, a woman grieving. I wasn't sure you'd actually come, I said. I almost didn't, but I figured you deserved answers. After everything Vincent put you through, you deserve at least that much. Her directness surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness or manipulation. Instead, she seemed resigned, almost relieved. How long have you known about me? I asked. From the beginning. Vincent never lied to me about being married. That was one of his conditions when we started seeing each other, that I know exactly what I was getting into. And you were fine with being the other woman? Laura's jaw tightened. I was 28 years old and stupid enough to believe him when he said he was going to leave you. He said his marriage was over in everything but name, that he was only staying because of Marcus, that once his son was grown, he'd file for divorce. But he never did? No, There was always another reason, another excuse. Marcus was in college and needed stability. Then Marcus was starting his career and needed his father's support. Then you were getting older, and Vincent felt guilty. The excuses evolved, but the result was always the same. He wasn't leaving. So why did you stay? Laura looked down at her hands. By the time I realized he was never going to leave, I was pregnant with Tommy, and I loved Vincent, despite everything. I loved the man he was when he was with me, even knowing that man was built on lies. Does that make me terrible?
I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe it just makes you human. But Laura, you had his child. You built a life with him. You got the parts of Vincent I never did. How am I supposed to feel about that? I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. But Eleanor, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for loving Vincent, but for the pain our relationship caused you. You didn't deserve any of this. I pulled out the photographs I'd brought from the cabin. Tell me about these. Tell me about your life with my husband. Laura looked at them, tears gathering. We had weekends, sometimes a full week if Vincent could get away. He'd come to the cabin and we'd pretend we were a normal family. We'd cook together, hike, read by the fireplace. Tommy called him Dad. We celebrated birthdays and holidays and anniversaries. It was real, even though we knew it was temporary. Even though we knew on Sunday or Monday, Vincent would drive back to Riverside Falls and go back to being your husband. Did it ever bother you, sharing him? Every single day, I'd watch him pack and drive away, and I'd hate that he was going back to you. I'd hate that you got to wake up beside him every morning, that you got to call yourself his wife publicly. But then he'd come back, and for a few days, he'd be mine again, and I'd convince myself that was enough. It sounds exhausting. It was. It destroyed me slowly over 34 years. I stayed because I loved him and because leaving would have meant admitting I'd wasted most of my adult life. And I stayed for Tommy because whatever else Vincent was, he loved our son. He was a good father when he was with us. I thought about that. Vincent being a good father to Tommy while becoming distant from Marcus. Had he been trying to make up for his absences? Or had he simply preferred his second family? Did Vincent ever talk about leaving everything to you and Tommy? Did he mention his will? Laura shook her head. He told me years ago that he'd make sure we were taken care of if anything happened to him, but he never gave me details. He said it was better if I didn't know too much, that it would protect me if everything came out. It came out 6 months ago. To Marcus and his wife Claudia. They went to the cabin and confronted Vincent about your existence. Laura's eyes widened. Marcus knew? He's known since he was 16. He followed Vincent to the cabin and saw you together. My God. Laura pressed her hand to her mouth. Vincent never told me. He never said Marcus knew. Vincent kept a lot of secrets. But 6 months ago, Marcus and Claudia showed up at the cabin asking questions about Vincent's will, his finances, what provisions he'd made for you and Tommy. Vincent wrote about it in his journal. He said their visit made him uncomfortable. I pulled out copies of Vincent's journal entries and slid them across the table. Laura read them, her face growing paler. They were planning to contest the will, she said, even before Vincent died. It looks that way. And 3 months after an uncomfortable confrontation about inheritance, my husband conveniently died in a way that couldn't be easily investigated. You think they killed him? It wasn't a question. I think it's possible, and I think if they did, you and I are the only people who have any hope of proving it. Laura sat back, her face stricken. Vincent was afraid. The last few times I saw him, he seemed worried. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder.
I asked him what was wrong, but he wouldn't tell me. He said he was handling it. When was the last time you saw him? 2 days before he died. He came to the cabin on Thursday evening. We had dinner, spent the night together. He left Friday morning saying he had to get back for a meeting, but he seemed distracted, not himself. Did he mention Marcus or Claudia? No, but he got a phone call while he was there. He stepped outside to take it, and when he came back in, he looked upset. I asked who it was, but he said it was just work. What time was the call? Around 8 o'clock Thursday evening. I remember because we were about to watch a movie. I made a mental note. If I could get Vincent's phone records, that call might tell us something important. Laura, I need your help. I need to know everything about Vincent's last few months. Any changes in his behavior, any conversations about Marcus or Claudia, anything unusual. Can you do that? Laura nodded slowly, but Eleanor, if Marcus and Claudia really did kill Vincent, they're dangerous. What makes you think they won't come after us? Because we're going to be smarter than Vincent was. We're going to gather evidence carefully, build a case that can't be dismissed, and we're going to make sure that if anything happens to either of us, that evidence goes straight to the police. You've thought this through. I've had 3 days to think about nothing else. Laura reached across the table and took my hand. The gesture was so unexpected that I almost pulled away. But there was something in her eyes, a shared pain, mutual understanding that stopped me. I'm sorry, she said again, for all of it. But Eleanor, if we're going to do this, if we're going to expose what Marcus and Claudia did, we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets, no more lies. Can we do that?
I looked at this woman, my husband's mistress, the person who'd gotten the life I thought was mine, and realized we were bound together now by something stronger than rivalry. We were bound by a need for truth and a thirst for justice. No more secrets, I agreed. We work together to find out what happened to Vincent. And if Marcus and Claudia are responsible, we make sure they pay for it. Even if it means destroying your relationship with your son? My relationship with my son was destroyed the moment he chose to keep Vincent's secrets for 26 years. Whatever happens now, Marcus brought it on himself. We spent the next hour comparing notes, sharing information, building a timeline of Vincent's last months. Laura told me about his increasing nervousness, his preoccupation with financial matters, his unusual attention to making sure his affairs were in order. He updated his life insurance policies in January, Laura said, made sure both families were listed as beneficiaries. At the time, I thought he was just being responsible. Now I wonder if he sensed something was wrong. Did he ever mention feeling ill, heart problems, chest pains? Never. Vincent was healthy. He hiked regularly, watched his diet, took care of himself. His father lived to 92. There was no family history of heart disease. Another piece that didn't fit. Healthy 72-year-old men didn't typically drop dead without warning signs, unless someone helped them along. I need to see Vincent's phone records and his credit card statements from the last 6 months. Can you help me get access? I have passwords to some of his accounts, Laura admitted. He gave them to me years ago in case of emergency. I never used them while he was alive. But now we use every resource we have. Laura, I need you to pull everything you can from those accounts. Look for unusual purchases, strange phone calls, anything that might tell us what Vincent was dealing with. What will you do? I'm going to talk to the neighbor who found Vincent's body, and I'm going to find a way to get that coffee mug tested for toxins, the one that was supposedly washed clean. Laura's eyes widened. You think they poisoned him? I think there are substances that can trigger a heart attack, and I think if you know what you're doing, you can make murder look like natural causes. Claudia is smart, calculating. If she and Marcus planned this, they wouldn't have been sloppy. This is insane, Laura whispered. We're talking about your son committing murder. I know, but I'd rather face an insane truth than live with a comfortable lie. I've spent 45 years living with comfortable lies, Laura.
I'm done with that. We exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, promising to stay in touch daily. As we stood to leave, Laura hesitated. Eleanor, thank you. For what? For not hating me. For seeing me as a person instead of just the other woman. Vincent always said you were kind. I see now that he was right. Don't thank me yet, I said. We have a long road ahead and it's going to get ugly. Are you sure you're ready? Vincent was the love of my life. If someone killed him, I want them to pay, no matter who they are. I nodded. We understood each other perfectly. I drove back to Riverside Falls in the dark, my mind churning with everything Laura had told me. The phone call on Thursday night, Vincent's increasing nervousness, his sudden attention to making sure his affairs were in order. He knew something was wrong. Maybe not specifically that Marcus and Claudia were planning to kill him, but he'd sensed danger. When I got back to Beatrice's house, it was nearly 9 p.m. My sister was waiting up, worry on her face. Where have you been? I was about to call the police. I met with Laura, I said, Vincent's other woman. We talked for hours. And? And she's going to help me investigate Vincent's death. She has access to his accounts, his phone records. Together, we might be able to find proof that Marcus and Claudia were involved. Beatrice sat beside me, taking my hand. Eleanor, are you sure about this? Once you go down this road, there's no going back. I'm sure. Laura confirmed that Vincent was afraid in his last weeks, that he got a phone call on Thursday night that upset him, that he died less than 24 hours later. What if they're dangerous? What if investigating puts you at risk? I thought about Claudia's phone call, about her thinly veiled threats, her attempts to manipulate me into contesting the will. They are dangerous, which is why I need to be careful, but I can't let fear stop me from finding the truth. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. What do you need from me? Time, a place to stay while I investigate, and someone who knows what I'm doing, so if anything happens to me, the evidence doesn't disappear. You have all of that, but promise me you'll be careful. I promise. The next morning, I began my investigation in earnest. I called the neighbor who found Vincent's body, a man named Harold Chen, who lived half a mile from the cabin. Mr. Chen, this is Eleanor Ashford, Vincent's wife. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the day you found him. Of course, Mrs. Ashford. I'm so sorry for your loss. Vincent was a good neighbor. Thank you. Can you tell me what you remember about that day?
Harold's voice was thoughtful. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd gone over to borrow some tools. Vincent had a good set of wrenches I needed. His car was in the driveway, but when I knocked, there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so I went in to check on him. That's when I found him in his chair by the fireplace. The door was unlocked? Yes, I remember being surprised by that. Vincent was usually careful about locking up. My pulse quickened. Was there any sign that someone else had been there? Any dishes in the sink, extra coffee cups, anything unusual? Now that you mention it, there was a coffee mug on the table beside him. It was clean, though. Looked like it had been washed and dried. But the coroner's report said condensation from an open window washed it clean. That's strange. The window wasn't open when I got there. I'm the one who opened it to air out the room before the police arrived. My heart was pounding now. The official report said the window had been open, that condensation had washed away the mug's contents, but Harold was saying the window was closed when he arrived. Someone had lied. And if they'd lied about the window, what else had they lied about? Mr. Chen, did you see anyone else near the cabin that day? Any other cars? Not that day, but the Friday before, the day Vincent probably died, according to the coroner, I did see a silver car driving away from his place around midday. I didn't think much of it at the time. What kind of silver car? Looked like a Lexus. Nice car. I figured it was one of Vincent's clients or something. Marcus drove a silver Lexus. I thanked Harold and hung up, my hands shaking. Marcus had been at the cabin the day Vincent died. He'd lied about having plans that weekend. He'd been there. I pulled out my phone and called Laura. We need to meet, today. I just talked to the neighbor who found Vincent, and there's something you need to know. 2 hours later, Laura and I were sitting in a parking lot outside Whispering Pines, comparing notes on our phones. Laura had pulled Vincent's phone records and credit card statements. "Look at this," she said, showing me her screen. Thursday night at 8:07 p.m., Vincent received a call from Marcus's cell phone. It lasted 12 minutes. "That's the call you mentioned, the one that upset Vincent." "Yes, and look at this credit card charge from Friday morning, Mountain View gas station, just off Highway 12. That's the road from here to Riverside Falls." Vincent was driving home Friday morning. He stopped for gas, but look at the timestamp, 11:15 a.m. And look at this next charge, Riverside Falls Pharmacy, 2:30 p.m. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Vincent made it back to Riverside Falls Friday afternoon. He didn't die at the cabin Thursday night like we thought. He died Friday afternoon or evening after going to the pharmacy, after being home. We looked at each other, the implications sinking in. "What was he picking up at the pharmacy?" I asked. Laura pulled up another screen. "I checked his insurance records. He filled a prescription for blood pressure medication. Completely routine. But, Eleanor, if he was home Friday afternoon and Marcus saw him, then Marcus was at the cabin after Vincent left, which means Marcus went there specifically not to see Vincent, but for some other reason. Or Vincent went back to the cabin later that afternoon. Maybe Marcus called him, asked him to come back for some reason. I thought about the neighbor's account. The clean coffee mug, the unlocked door, the closed window that the coroner's report claimed had been open. What if Marcus and Claudia went to the cabin Friday afternoon, called Vincent, asked him to meet them there, told him they wanted to apologize for their uncomfortable visit 6 months ago, that they wanted to clear the air? Vincent would have gone. He was always trying to fix things, to keep everyone happy. So he goes back to the cabin Friday afternoon, has coffee with Marcus and Claudia. They put something in his drink, something that triggers a heart attack. Vincent dies. They wash the mug, stage the scene to look like he'd been alone, then they leave. But they make a mistake. They report the window as being open to explain why the mug was clean, but the neighbor says it was closed. And they don't account for Harold seeing Marcus's car leaving that day. We sat in silence, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "We need more proof," I said finally. "This is all circumstantial. We need something concrete." "What about the pharmacy prescription? If Vincent filled it Friday afternoon, the timing means he was alive and well hours before he supposedly died of a heart attack." "That's good, but we need more. We need to prove Marcus and Claudia were at the cabin that day. We need phone records showing they called Vincent. We need to find out what they might have used to trigger the heart attack." "Digitalis," Laura said suddenly. "It's derived from foxglove plants. In large doses, it can cause heart arrhythmias and cardiac arrest, and it metabolizes quickly, so it wouldn't show up in a standard autopsy unless they were specifically looking for it." "How do you know that?" I asked. "I read a lot of mystery novels," Laura said with a grim smile. "And Claudia is a paralegal. She would have access to legal cases involving poisoning. She'd know what to look for." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me. It's urgent." I showed it to Laura. "He's getting nervous. He knows I'm investigating." "What are you going to do?" I thought about my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd kept secrets for 26 years, the person who might have murdered his own father for an inheritance. "I'm going to set a trap," I said. "I'm going to make Marcus think I'm willing to work with him and Claudia to contest the will. Get him to talk, maybe even confess." "That's dangerous, Eleanor." "Everything about this is dangerous, but I'm not backing down. Not now, not when we're this close to the truth." Over the next week, I played my role perfectly. I called Marcus back, told him I'd been thinking about Claudia's suggestion that maybe she was right about contesting the will. I let him think I was on his side, that we were a united family against the interloper who'd stolen Vincent's affection. Marcus was relieved, eager to move forward, We met for coffee, and I recorded every conversation on my phone. Claudia joined us for some meetings, and I watched her work her manipulation, talking about justice and family and what Vincent would have really wanted. All the while, Laura was pulling financial records, finding evidence of Marcus and Claudia's mounting debts. They'd been living beyond their means, counting on Vincent's inheritance to bail them out. When Vincent updated his will to include Laura and Tommy, their financial house of cards started collapsing. They'd needed Vincent dead before he could change his mind again, before he could cut them out entirely. 2 weeks after my meeting with Laura, I had enough. Recorded conversations where Marcus and Claudia discussed their relief that Vincent was gone before he could complicate things further, financial records showing their desperate situation, phone records proving Marcus called Vincent Friday afternoon, the neighbor's testimony about the closed window and the silver Lexus. It was time. I called Detective Sarah Morrison at the Riverside Falls Police Department. Detective, I need to report a murder. My husband, Vincent Ashford, didn't die of natural causes. He was killed by my son Marcus and my daughter-in-law, Claudia. 3 days later, I sat in a witness room at the police station, watching through one-way glass as Detective Morrison questioned Marcus and Claudia separately. Marcus broke first. Faced with the evidence, the phone records, the neighbor's testimony, the financial records, he crumbled. He admitted to calling Vincent Friday afternoon, asking him to meet at the cabin to work things out. He admitted that Claudia had researched Digitalis, that she'd obtained it through channels he claimed not to know about. He admitted they put it in Vincent's coffee, that they'd waited while he died, staging the scene to look natural, that they'd panicked about the mug and washed it, opened the window, then realized that made it look more suspicious, so they'd closed it again and hoped the coroner wouldn't notice. He admitted everything, except meaning to kill Vincent. He claimed they'd only wanted to make him sick, to scare him into changing the will back. They hadn't meant for him to die. I listened to my son confess to patricide and felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. Claudia, predictably, tried to blame everything on Marcus, but the evidence was overwhelming. They were both charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The trial would take months. Laura and I would both have to testify. The whole sordid story would become public. Vincent's double life, the secret family, the greedy son and calculating daughter-in-law who'd killed for money. But sitting there in that police station, watching my son be led away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but peace. The truth was finally out. The lies were finally over. And Eleanor Ashford, the accommodating wife, the trusting mother, the woman who'd spent 70 years making herself small, had finally stood up and demanded justice. Whatever came next, I would face it with Laura by my side, 2 women bound together by grief and truth and the shared understanding that family wasn't always blood. Sometimes family was the people who stood with you when your whole world fell apart and helped you build something new from the ruins. I walked out of that police station into the autumn sunshine, and for the first time in 45 years, I knew exactly who I was. I was Eleanor Ashford. I was 70 years old. I was a widow, a betrayed wife, a mother who'd lost her son to his own greed. But I was also a survivor, a truth seeker, a woman who'd found her strength in the darkest moment of her life. And I was finally, completely free. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of Maplewood Cabin, watching the sunrise over the lake.
The cabin was mine now. Vincent's will had been executed as written, and I'd inherited my half of the estate. Laura and Tommy had inherited theirs. But Laura and I had made a different decision. Instead of selling the cabin, we'd decided to share it, to turn Vincent's place of lies into something honest and good. Tommy had moved in temporarily while finishing his residency nearby. He's a good young man, thoughtful, kind, with Vincent's best qualities and none of his capacity for deception. Meeting him was awkward at first, but over time, we'd developed a cautious friendship. He's my stepson in a way, part of the complicated family Vincent had left behind. Marcus and Claudia were in prison, serving 15 to 25 years each. I'd gone to see Marcus once, 3 months after his conviction. He'd cried, apologized, begged for forgiveness. I'd told him the truth, that I forgave him for keeping Vincent's secret, but I couldn't forgive him for murder, that he'd have to live with what he'd done, just as I had to live with what he'd destroyed. I hadn't been back since.
Laura came out onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee, handing me one. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the water. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, finally. "Investigating? Turning in your own son?" I thought about that question, about the life I'd lost and the truth I'd gained, about the price of justice and the cost of lies. "No," I said. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Marcus became someone capable of murder. But I don't regret choosing truth over comfortable lies. Not anymore." Laura nodded. "Vincent would be proud of you. Of us." "Vincent would be ashamed of what his lies created," I corrected gently. "But maybe he'd be glad we found each other, that something good came out of all this pain." We sipped our coffee and watched the sunrise over the lake. 2 women who'd loved the same man, who'd been betrayed by the same lies, who'd found strength in the most unexpected alliance. The cabin Vincent had built for secrets had become a place of truth. And Eleanor Ashford, the woman who'd spent 70 years being accommodating and small, had finally learned to take up space in her own life. It had cost her everything. Her marriage, her son, her illusions about family and love and trust. But she'd gained something more valuable. Herself. And that, in the end, was worth any price. The trial lasted 3 months, and every day felt like walking through fire. I sat in the courtroom beside Laura, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence against Marcus and Claudia. The phone records, the financial desperation, the neighbor's testimony about the silver Lexus and the closed window, Vincent's pharmacy records proving he'd been alive and well Friday afternoon, hours before the supposed time of death. And then there was the digitalis. The prosecution had brought in an expert toxicologist who explained how the drug, derived from foxglove plants, could trigger cardiac arrest in someone with no prior heart problems, how it metabolized quickly, leaving minimal traces unless you knew specifically to look for it, how someone with legal knowledge, someone like Claudia, would know exactly how to research such things. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head held high. Marcus sat at the defense table, unable to meet my eyes. Claudia stared straight ahead, her face a mask of cold calculation even now. The prosecutor asked me to describe the moment I'd discovered Vincent's secret, to explain how I'd found the journal, the photographs, the evidence of his double life. And then she asked me the question that mattered most. "Mrs. Ashford, when you first suspected your son might be involved in your husband's death, what made you choose to investigate rather than simply accept the coroner's ruling of natural causes?" I looked directly at Marcus as I answered. Because I'd spent 45 years accepting comfortable lies instead of demanding uncomfortable truths.
I'd spent my entire adult life being accommodating, trusting, willing to look the other way rather than rock the boat. And where did that get me? A husband who lived a secret life for 34 years? A son who kept that secret for 26 years? A marriage built on deception? I paused, gathering my thoughts. When I saw the evidence, the timing of Marcus and Claudia's visit, Vincent's nervousness afterward, the suspicious circumstances of his death, I had a choice. I could be the Eleanor I'd always been, the woman who accepted what she was told and asked no questions, or I could be someone new, someone who demanded the truth, no matter how painful. I chose truth, and I'd chose it again. Marcus finally looked at me then, tears streaming down his face, but I felt nothing but that cold, hollow emptiness that had become my constant companion. The defense tried to paint me as a bitter widow, desperate to blame someone for her husband's betrayal. They suggested I was mentally unstable, that my obsession with proving murder was really just an inability to accept Vincent's natural death, combined with the shock of discovering his affair. But Laura's testimony corroborated everything I'd said. Tommy testified about his father's increasing fear in the weeks before his death. Harold Chen, the neighbor, testified about the closed window and the silver Lexus. The financial experts showed Marcus and Claudia's mounting debts, their desperate need for inheritance money. And then Marcus himself took the stand. His lawyer had advised against it, I learned later, but Marcus insisted. He wanted to explain, to make me understand that he'd never meant for things to go so far. I just wanted Dad to change the will back, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Claudia and I were drowning in debt. Dad's law practice was supposed to come to me, but then he started talking about how Tommy was showing interest in law school, how maybe they could practice together someday. I could see my inheritance slipping away. He wiped his eyes. When we visited the cabin 6 months ago, I tried to reason with Dad, tried to make him see that his legitimate family should come first. But he wouldn't listen. He said he loved both families equally, that he'd provided for everyone fairly. He didn't care that Claudia and I were struggling. "So you decided to kill him?" the prosecutor asked. "No, we just wanted to scare him, make him sick enough that he'd reconsider. Claudia found information about digitalis online, how it could cause heart problems without being easily detected. How someone with legal knowledge, someone like Claudia, would know exactly how to research such things. But that's not what happened, is it?"
Marcus shook his head, sobbing now. "We put it in his coffee that Friday afternoon, just a little bit. But Dad, he had a stronger reaction than we expected. He started having chest pains almost immediately. We panicked. We didn't call for help. We watched him die." The courtroom was silent except for Marcus's weeping. "And then you staged the scene to look like natural causes," the prosecutor continued. "Yes, we washed the coffee mug, tried to make it look like he'd been alone. Claudia remembered reading that condensation could wash away evidence, so we opened a window. But then we got scared that looked too suspicious, so we closed it again. We didn't know the neighbor had seen my car. We thought we'd gotten away with it. Until your mother started investigating." Marcus looked at me then, his face destroyed. "I never wanted to hurt Mom. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted what should have been mine, what I deserved as Dad's legitimate son." That word, legitimate, hung in the air like poison, as if Tommy's existence was somehow less valid because his parents weren't married, as if love and family could only count if they came with legal documentation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud. Marcus got 20 years. Claudia got 25 because of her role in planning and researching the method. I watched them being led away, and I waited to feel something: grief, relief, vindication. But there was only that vast emptiness where my son used to be. After the trial, Laura and I had to figure out what came next. Vincent's estate had to be settled, the cabin's future decided.
We met with lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, the whole complicated mess of untangling a dead man's double life. We could sell the cabin, Laura suggested one afternoon as we sat in yet another lawyer's office. Split the proceeds and never have to see each other again. Start fresh. I looked at her, this woman who'd been my husband's mistress, my unexpected ally, the person who'd stood beside me through the investigation and trial. We'd been through something together that most people couldn't imagine. Or, I said slowly, we could keep it, share it. Turn Vincent's place of secrets into something honest. Laura studied my face. You'd want that after everything? Vincent's lies destroyed a lot of things, but they also brought us together. You and I, we understand each other in a way no one else can. We both loved him, we were both betrayed by him, and we both chose truth over comfortable deception. She smiled, a real smile. Maybe the first I'd seen from her. Tommy's doing his residency in Seattle. It's only 2 hours from the cabin. He could use it on his days off. And I need a place to escape to, somewhere that isn't filled with 45 years of memories of a marriage that never really existed. So we kept it, drew up a legal agreement for shared ownership and use. Tommy moved in part-time and I started spending weekends there, slowly reclaiming the space Vincent had forbidden me from entering for 35 years. The town of Riverside Falls had, of course, been scandalized by the trial. The respected lawyer's secret family, the son who murdered his father for inheritance money, the elderly widow who turned in her own child. People I'd known for decades crossed the street to avoid me. Church friends stopped calling. The neighborhood gossip was relentless. But I found I didn't care. The Eleanor who needed their approval, who'd made herself small to fit into their expectations, was gone. The woman I'd become had no patience for people who valued appearances over truth. Beatrice remained constant, as she'd always been. "I'm proud of you," she told me one evening over dinner at her house. "What you did took courage most people will never have." I destroyed my family. No. Marcus destroyed the family when he chose greed over integrity. Claudia destroyed it when she planned a murder. You just refused to help them hide what they'd done. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just let it go. If Vincent's death as natural causes would have been easier for everyone. Easier isn't always right, Eleanor. You know that now. I did know it. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones are different things. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made the right choice, if turning in my own son made me a monster, even if he was a murderer. But then I'd remember Vincent's journal entries, the casual cruelty of his deception, the way he'd compartmentalized his life, keeping us all in separate boxes, never letting the truth contaminate his carefully constructed lies. And I'd remember Marcus at 16, discovering the truth and choosing to keep it. 26 years of watching me live in ignorance. 26 years of family dinners where he sat across from me, knowing what I didn't. 26 years of silence that enabled his father's betrayal. No, I'd made the right choice, even if it cost me everything. Tommy came to visit me 3 months after the trial. We met at a cafe in Riverside Falls, this young man who was technically my stepson, though we'd never had that relationship. He wanted to thank you for finding out what really happened to Dad, for not letting Marcus and Claudia get away with it.
You don't hate me for sending your half-brother to prison? Marcus made his choices, just like Dad made his. You just refused to help them hide the consequences. He stirred his coffee. Mom told me you're sharing the cabin with us. That means a lot to her, to both of us. Your mother and I don't know what we are exactly. Not friends, not in the traditional sense, but we understand each other. You're survivors, Tommy said simply, of Dad's lies, of Marcus's greed. You survived, and you did it together. He was right. That's what we were. Survivors. A year after the trial, I filed for divorce from Vincent's memory. Not literally, of course. You can't divorce a dead man.
But I went through his things systematically, getting rid of everything that reminded me of the life we'd supposedly shared. The photographs on the mantle, the clothes in his closet, the books on his shelves. I kept only two things: his journal, as evidence of what deception looked like, and a single photograph of us on our wedding day. Both of us young and hopeful and completely unaware of what was coming. I put the photograph in a drawer not to look at, but to remember. To remind myself that the Eleanor in that picture, the 25-year-old teacher who thought she'd found her happily ever after, had deserved better than the life Vincent gave her. But she'd been too afraid to demand it, too accommodating to question, too trusting to investigate. I would never be that woman again. Now, sitting on the porch of Maplewood Cabin as the sun sets over the lake, I'm at peace with who I've become. Not the bitter, vengeful woman some people see, not the noble truth seeker others admire. Just Eleanor Ashford, at 71 years old, finally comfortable in her own skin. Laura joins me with 2 glasses of wine. We toast to Vincent's memory, not the man we thought he was, but the man he actually was, flaws and lies and all. Do you think he loved us? Laura asks. Either of us really loved us? I think Vincent loved himself, I say after considering. And he loved the idea of us, the devoted wife, the passionate mistress. But actual love, the kind that requires honesty and sacrifice? No, I don't think he was capable of that. That's sad. It is, but it's also freeing. Knowing I don't have to waste any more time trying to figure out what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. It wasn't about me. It was about him and his inability to choose, to commit, to be honest. We sit in comfortable silence as the sky turns pink and gold. Tomorrow, Tommy will arrive for a long weekend. Next week, Beatrice is coming to visit. The cabin that was once forbidden is now filled with the people who matter, not the ones I'm supposed to love because of blood or obligation, but the ones I choose because of understanding and shared truth. Marcus writes to me sometimes from prison. Long letters full of apologies and regrets. I read them but don't respond. What would I say? I forgive you? I don't? You're still my son? DNA doesn't erase murder. Maybe someday I'll write back. Maybe someday the emptiness where he used to be will fill with something else. Not love, probably never love again, but perhaps acceptance. Understanding that people are complex, that even murderers can be someone's child, that justice and family don't have to cancel each other out. But not yet. Not today. Today, I'm just Eleanor. 71 years old, widow, betrayed wife, mother of a murderer, survivor, truth seeker, woman who finally learned to take up space in her own life. And that, in the end, is enough.